ask questions. I know it's interesting to me and I can talk a lot. That doesn't mean it's interesting for you, so please engage. We're going to play for 45 minutes, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that right? 30,
Yeah.
45 minutes?
Yeah.
Then we can chat. Yeah, you did a territorial acknowledgement, but I just want to echo that for us, it's really important for us to have the privilege of being here and the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and the Métis people. Yeah, it's a different place to work. It's not a land that I've worked on, and I feel quite lucky to have the opportunity for the first time to explore this place beyond family. And it's quite different for us, so thank you for having us and for the non-settler and traditional territory folk for having us. I'm going to stop talking because I'm already talking too much.
Yeah, we both thank you so much for the introduction, and yeah, we're really excited to share some of this work with you. So we're going to play through 3 of the co-composed pieces that we've been working on the last about a year. And we can talk more about the process afterwards, so if any questions come up, but I guess the main thing to kind of know in advance is we do have a tuning system that interacts between our 2 instruments. I have a small organ, it's a pipe organ that's tuned with the tuning system in mind, but also there are notes outside of it, and yeah, you'll probably hear different things go back and forth between the 2 instruments.
And we're going to play the 3 pieces straight through.
Yeah. So, yeah, we invite any questions anyone has, or we can talk a little bit about the work to start. Did anyone have any questions at this point, or? Yeah.
About the last fragments that you played, those kind of lower pitches and sort of in between, like there was like the woo 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 thing going on, but it was
Yeah.
low ebb. So I'm just curious how that relates to why you put that at the end and what the effect you were trying to come across.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. So a lot of what we were doing was trying to play with that exact effect in different ways. So especially with the organ, I can bend the pitch up and down, and it changes the speed of the interaction of pitches. So then you probably heard that beating sound was faster or slower. So yeah, that was intentional to kind of draw that out and to make the psychoacoustic effect. So that's great that you could hear it from there too. It's always hard to know in a space. But yeah, so that's something that we had planned out kind of in the structure of that piece.
Was it harder to hold that? Sometimes you would have to retake that low wobbly frequency and then,
Yeah.
right? Was
Yeah.
it harder one to maintain or whatever?
Yeah, because like I ran out of air, so I can only go for so long, and then it kind of breaks the illusion. So then I try to take air fairly quickly, but if I push it too long, you may have heard everything went an octave higher. Yeah, so that's kind of one of the riskier things that we've also integrated, I think, in kind of our style. So playing with that, but yeah, so there's always that little challenge for having sustain because it breaks it.
It was like a fragile register to
Yeah.
hold on to.
That's actually the perfect word. Yeah, fragile. Because also just achieving that kind of interaction of sound, it's pretty fragile in itself, and it's a little bit different every time we play.
In both of our instruments.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, we can talk about that. But I think there's maybe something to talk about too in the way that we structured the set a little bit, like just in terms
Yeah.
of pitch
Yeah, maybe you could talk
mapping.
about that.
So like the first piece is I wouldn't really call it a transcription, but Countess de D, Chanteur, which is a 12th century troubadourite. I think Kate can correct me if I'm wrong. The earliest troubadourite notated music written by a period or written by a woman.
Well, that we have the complete. We have the musical score as well as the poetry. So there's a lot of poetry that we still have from women troubadours at that time, but there's very little with any musical notation. So Mitch and I took Dia's Cantar, which does have the full music, and then we kind of did our own transcription of it and in our tuning
To fit
system.
our tuning system, and so what we're doing there is kind of structured through D, and then the middle piece that we were doing, we used a lot of the same pitches for that, and that was the kind of the middle 20-odd minutes.
Yeah.
And then the latter piece had shared pitches and then some new ones that came in, so we kind of built the set as well, so that there's that continuity, but also new notes that are coming in, because it can be a lot to listen to for 20 or 30 minutes when there's a limited set of pitches that we're working with because of our instruments. And I guess that's a good thing to talk about how we built the tuning system. So everything is, not everything, but the starting place is with my instrument, which is around feedback from a spring reverb. So like in a guitar amp, you have a spring reverb, and I'm just taking the output signal and feeding it back in, and then I can insert filters in that signal path, and then that lets me change the pitch. But I'm always subject to the complexities of that spring, and springs aren't musical instruments, they're pretty non-linear, and spring to spring won't react the same way, and my spring won't react the same way day on day. So we built the tuning system from this very materially contingent point that is going to change. Like for example, so I was playing with a different case, and then when I put this together for this project, suddenly I couldn't get some of the pitches that I had before because of, I think, there's probably some sort of mechanical bonding thing going because it was a wooden box rather than a aluminum. So there's these kind of things, and certain notes will speak differently, or if I change the signal path, there's other notes that are easier, or some notes that are harder to get to. So we kind of mapped that,
Yeah.
and then built with the organ across.
Exactly. So with because I don't have the huge range that Mitch has, but then we took the notes that I do have from the map, and then I modified my tuning to fit that. And then I don't know, you may have noticed that I moved some paper. So at the top of each pipe is a ring of parchment paper, and that actually is what tunes the instrument. So I could change the tuning as we were playing as well to kind of match a little bit closer or farther from what Mitch had in his.
Yeah, so we have a kind of a shared structure with lots of little points of deviation for color.
Yeah.
And ways that we can change that over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, just one more question. Are you basing your pitch relationship on certain intervals, or is it more random than that?
We're building mostly off point specificity, so I think everything to some degree is shared across both of us, and then tuning deviations. So there's some notes, like Kate has 3 Ds, all within a quarter tone of each other.
Yeah, it's actually pretty specific. Yeah. And then there's extra, less controlled deviation that happens depending on environmental factors, because like we can't predict how the instruments will react over time or within a space. So there's always a little bit, like what we just played, it will never sound the same as that moment, which is kind of interesting too.
And I guess that's the other thing is that we do have a harmonic series based around 72 hertz that I'm using to reinforce a lot. So we're only using pitches that are shared within that harmonic series and the feedback system, but it lets me have something that I know will always work when I press that, rather than the spring that like sometimes just won't speak. So it just gives a little bit of security, but also just, yeah, pitch stability, security, but also just reinforcement and the ability to do more than one thing at a time. I think there was a question on my list. Yeah.
Is the parchment standard for the instrument, or is it something you came up with as a solution?
No, the builder used parchment. So standard is parchment or metal. You can also have kind of the same material, and so it changes the sound a little bit depending on what you have. But I find parchment is probably the best for me because I travel a lot and it doesn't get bent. So yeah, because the alloy that the pipes are made of, it's very, very soft. So it's that's another thing to take into consideration. But yeah, it's pretty standard. Although sometimes I add paper. We didn't play that particular piece today, but sometimes I put a ring of paper inside to extend it, and then that creates kind of an envelope of overtones that you can hear. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little more in depth about the creation of your instrument, because you said you built it.
Oh, me.
Yeah,
Cool.
the box.
Sorry, Kate's. I always think Kate's instrument's way cooler than mine. Yeah, so I'm playing modular synth, and I designed it around that feedback interaction I was talking about. And the bunch of sliders on the top here is a fixed filter bank. So I have 16 points, and they're kind of arranged loosely around sevenths, but and they're fairly narrow filter types, the cutoff. So I'm getting like pretty tight cuts within the frequency spectrum, and that lets me pick out points for the feedback system to organize around. But within there, like gain staging matters a lot, so I'm pulling back and pushing to be able to get different points to come out at different times. I'm using, for control, a little joystick, because we're only using 4 of the 16 sliders, so the joystick gives kind of more dynamic control where I can have just a smoother gesture and transition. I use a delay line because there's a pitch that's really important to us that doesn't speak unassisted anymore, so I needed a delay line to access this weaker point of feedback. Then there's the Harmonic Oscillator, which is the first 8 partials of the harmonic series that I'm using that are reinforcing. And then there's some other sounds that we didn't use as much tonight, but things where I could, like some ring modulating stuff to get other tonally, or not, yeah, pitch related material, or just using for slow pulses. And then everything else, I'm just playing a couple reverbs to be able to extend different sounds or soften different sounds, and then using a delay pedal more as a chorus to control modulation amounts, and I'm controlling the chorusing on both of the reverb pedals as well, and that's just giving me other ways to control beating. And then I do use a looping pedal. In this set I was using it mostly to recall samples, again, just to be able to build layers. Did that track?
Awesome.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
How you notate? Because I noticed you had paper that you were.
Yeah, I have the tuning on the top, just to keep myself honest. I remember all our notes, 16 notes. It's a lot to remember. And then this is all of the pieces for our for this project. Actually, all of the scores are on here, so it's really rough notation. A lot of it's like I can pass it around or show you after, but it's really kind of timestamps that we're working through, because both our instruments were subject to their wills a lot. So we can't be like, well, on 4 minutes and 30 seconds, this is going to happen. We're going to hit this downbeat. So we're using really low time brackets to make up for that. And then I just need some technical stuff to hit changes between different sounds, and making sure that I'm moving from sound world to sound world. So I have kind of a tech sheet that I use as well as a sheet to make sure that I'm changing.
Could it be you or Kate that gives the like signaling the next?
Yeah, totally. Kate cut me off. It was good. And I think it's pretty intuitive. Like it's funny, we were recording last 2 weekends ago.
Yeah.
And we were really adamant we needed to be in the same room. And going back now, I think if we did it again, we caused ourselves more problems, because
yeah, I think we can
I made too much noise.
Well, your
maybe,
buttons.
my vigorous sliders. I think we've played together enough now that we have a pretty good sense of each other, and there's very little cueing and stuff that we need. We can kind of keep each other honest with a nod or whatever here or there, but most of the time we're pretty tuned in at this point. I'll take that pun.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of, it's reached that stage of communication, which is really great. So we can kind of just, he can tell from a very subtle move what a cue is. Yeah, you followed all.
Yeah. She's just humbling me. I mean, really, I follow her. It's great.
Well, it seems like that would be a logical instrument to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the
So
bellow.
parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's breath, right? Like I don't have to stop, which, for better or worse.
Yeah.
It's more of a maybe strange reflection and question. I work a lot with MRI scanning. It really reminded me a lot of being close to the MRI scanner. The sound, but also that at times I felt that I could feel it in one part of my body and then in another one. So it's more of a question to everyone. Did other people feel that too? Like at one point I had it on my jaw, and then later it went kind of down to my hips. Did other people feel that too? And do you feel that?
Yeah, it's definitely the tuning as an embodied practice is something that a dear friend of mine thinks a lot about and has taken on as her own practice of playing the violin. And I think a lot of her ideas, this is Mira Benjamin, a really, really brilliant violinist, have to do with like when you're in tune, you feel it. And that can mean like a really coarse like way of holding the violin, but also just being with sound. So more than just kind of like getting things to sit properly in equal temperament or whatever, but like that's the space that we're trying to move in, and especially with the beating, like it's very, I feel it very physically, or try to.
Yeah, that's great that you could feel it, because that's also one of the things we're trying to manipulate, and it's difficult to know in the space how that's going to translate, because your physical experience there would be very different than here or here. But yeah, I mean, I can certainly feel all of that in my body. I'm sure you felt it too.
Mhm.
It's interesting that it moved through your body, though. I assume it was with different pitches.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it must be different pictures, yeah. And you have that feeling when you're in the MRI scanner, depending on what protocol is being
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
You feel it in different places in your body.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious about your sort of broader musical lives and what else you do, and how did you come to this point in those trajectories?
Yeah, I'm a composer, predominantly writing for acoustic music, and then
Ah.
transitioned into doing more and more electronic work over the years, as it just let me work as a performer again. And yeah, I just wanted to be able to work through some of the ideas that I had, and realized more and more that electronics were a way to explore those ideas and connect in a different way than I could writing for acoustic. I still write acoustic instruments now
And what
again.
were you performing before?
I wasn't. I was writing for other people.
Oh, you weren't
Yeah,
performing at
I
all?
wasn't performing for a long time. Before that, I was a guitarist,
Gotcha.
doing that world, but really other people.
So
were
the spring
making
had
music.
made its appearance
Yeah,
already.
yeah, the modular and especially the feedback system were really
Yeah.
brought together a lot of different things that I was trying to get to in different ways.
Huh.
Yeah.
And you?
And I'm a harpsichordist.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so I do a lot of early music and
Huh.
contemporary music on harpsichord, and then I do trecento repertoire mostly with this organ. And I got into playing some new music, very experimental music, and also improvised music a lot. And yeah, then we kind of came together a couple of years ago with
Yeah,
trying-
2019, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the synth with organ, it just works really, really well.
Yeah.
You almost can't tell which sound is
No, I
coming
know.
from when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
organs also kind of were synthesizers.
Yeah, they're like
before
early synths.
Yeah.
pre-electricity, right?
Yeah.
Like especially with the big church organs, and you have so
Yeah.
much control over
All the
sound in a
overtones.
very parametric way, or parameter-based way. Like you
Yeah.
can really shape things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a similar way to the synth.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, so primarily composition background and for the performance
Mhm.
harpsichord, early music
Hmm.
background.
Thank you. Interesting.
Is there a psychological trajectory that you think about when thinking about rate of beat and everything?
Not really. It's just about sound for me, and structure, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't think of psychology that much myself.
I
Do you?
I think about kind of an intuitive feel, and I don't know if that is psychology. I don't know where that will go, but yeah, I'm thinking about exactly what the same kind of thing, but also with an overall kind of yeah, intuitive feel for the arc.
And I guess like conceptually, a lot of the points of reference for the pieces are really kind of abstract forms. Some of them aren't these timing blocks that we're working through. Like the last one, we were working through 4 minutes and 2 minutes and 3 minutes with very distinct changes in character over that time. But that's more about motion and stasis than psychological arc. Other things are, like the second piece we played is continuous, which is really working through that figure that's the name of the project, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail.
Hmm.
Yeah, so things like that are kind of where which is more often than not structural, I guess, except for the Ouroboros.
Yeah.
Has a lot more metaphoric reach.
Yeah, and imagery. Yeah.
Have you considered the visualizations of this stuff? I mean, I can imagine some sort of
Yeah.
visual corollary that would be really interesting with the beating.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah, we haven't discussed that, but it would be a nice extension
Yeah.
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of potential there. It's something we're keen to explore.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
That was really, really terrific to sit here and listen to. But I'm wondering, like, it's really interesting hearing you talk about just how, like, certain things are hard to predict or are always subject to just the environment that you're playing in. I'm wondering if like volume has any like part in those considerations, because I've just found it really interesting sitting here and like it never felt like the sound was like overpowering the space, but more like integrated with that space. Like I always find it really interesting seeing instruments that involve like breath in some capacity, but like while still being able to hear like my own breath at certain times. And I understand that like you are like thinking about like deep listening and that sort of practice. So I guess I'm just wondering like if volume is a consideration, or like how deep listening maybe like enters your practice, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think volume definitely is a consideration, and then keeping it at a human level, which is kind of this type of space, or this size of space works very well because we don't need amplification, or the organ doesn't. I mean, by default, you're going to have speakers, but it can
Well,
be, yeah,
I
kind of
mean,
a.
I can like, if everyone's quiet. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, so quiet, but the kind of idea of a community listening experience as well, and getting really deep into that, and being able to hear like the organ take a breath, for instance, but it not overpower other things that are going on. So that definitely is a consideration. Also with volume, for me personally, when I play, when things are louder, the pitch goes up, and quieter, the pitch goes down. So it's a very kind of sensitive thing. But yeah, I mean, I think ideally this is something where everyone can kind of zone in together as an experience that we're all sharing in different ways, different capacities, different physical reactions. But yeah, and that works the best if amplification isn't really needed beyond the acoustic phenomena of the room. Yeah, I don't know if you.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, there's a lot of points in which volume really, really matters within the system before it hits the speakers for me, and like certain nodes of the feedback system, if you drive them too hard, won't, or you get those pulsing things. There's all of these different artifacts that are all contingent on volume and gain staging, but then once it hits the speakers, I think I'm really interested in immersion, and I don't want, like, I want to be able to sit with the sound for 20 or 30 minutes comfortably. So that's really important for me, and then, yeah, everything that gets in.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
So I don't want to keep you too long, but your name, your group name, Imaginary Instruments, why did you choose that?
My wife, Annie,
Yeah.
came up with that name, which was great.
Well, no, you said it as a phrase, and what were you going to call yourselves?
Well, I wanted to call
Names,
myself
maybe.
the Beats, but didn't know what
But I think we're both interested in the sonic imaginary, so that's kind of.
Yeah, a lot of
yeah.
my theory work has been around the speculative side of things, and then, I mean, in so many regards, Kate's instrument is an imaginary instrument. Like, we know it existed in the 14th century, it's in shadow, but we
Yeah.
don't know what it played. We don't know if it was a sacred instrument. We don't know if it was a secular instrument, because the body of literature has been lost. So
Yeah.
there's stuff that people play on it now, but we don't know historically what it was played on. And then a modular synthesizer, because it's made of all of these modules, it can be whatever I imagine it to be. So both of our instruments in and of themselves are really imaginary to a degree.
Yeah, because really all of early music, it's an imagined practice. People have reimagined what it may have been,
Right.
but it's imaginary, so.
I have two quick things.
Cool.
The first one, you just mentioned organs, and you're not sure if this is secular or sacred. And tomorrow you're playing in a chapel. Is there any connection? Are you thinking about these sort of sacred traditions in sonicism sort of at all when you're doing this?
We didn't start out that way, but it was something we were reflecting on in an exchange in emails that were going back and forth, just thinking about the project, and I realized how much of what we are doing has to do with ritual and repetition, and it's more of the time and repetition of something like a liturgy. So it's really is tied up in those traditions, but from a secular vantage point for I think both of us.
Yeah.
But I think there is a lot of just when you look at histories of practices of attention, they're really tied to different sacred practices, be it Buddhism or Christian meditation practices, but also that space, like they get the best spaces. Cathedrals,
For sure, yeah.
Cathedrals and things like that. I think really having the space enter the sound making in a really active way is something that's so deeply tied to liturgical practice that I think there's a connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And deep listening was mentioned, and of course,
Mhm.
Pauline Oliveros
Yeah.
has this almost a spirituality of sound itself, which is a kind of secular sacred thing because it's not necessarily, church exactly, but there's something with the sound. And then I had a technical question because you mentioned you have harmonic series at 72 hertz, and there's like. I've been thinking about how the best way to say this, so I'm probably going to stumble over it. In the modular, you can do things in terms of, like, so you have this harmonic oscillator that's the 8 steps of this harmonic series. Is that just the natural harmonic series? Are you doing any tuning of upper harmonics?
No, I'm just using the first 8 partials, so, and it's funny because it's ostensibly equal temperament, only the 7th goes out a little bit, and
Yeah.
I didn't use that tonight.
I was wondering about temperament too. If you're, to what degree is your creating a tuning mean temperament
I think
too?
Just intonation for myself is much more where I think of in terms of temperament, but much more of kind of interest in naturally occurring temperaments and more relational temperaments, which JI lends itself to in the kind of JI adjacent worlds of tuning. So less of a rationalized JI and more of a felt JI, and that's where, like, when you get into that embodied tuning practice, like, you feel when something locks in relation in JI in a very different. I'm doing the violin thing. I'm thinking of Miro. Yeah, you feel it when it locks in a very different way than, like, well, I'm doing like 10 bass, quarter comma, mean tone extended by 32, and I'm going to play the 54th partial.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You don't want to be doing math. You want to be doing it.
Well, I can't. I'm just rubbish at math.
Because I wonder, and this will end up being kind of a comment, but there's a book, Tuning Timbre Spectrum Scale by William Setheries from like maybe 25 years ago, and it's math, but he shows that you can take 2 pitches, and if you tune the spectra, you can change their interval, you can change the perceived content of the interval. So he makes a 5th dissonant by retuning the spectra, and that seems like something that's like sort of in your wheelhouse in terms of the way you're making. In terms of how you're using tuning kind of as your main musical parameter. So I was thinking about that when I was asking that question.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to relation and deviation. So we have these points of confluence in our tuning system that we can relate to in different ways.
Yeah.
So there's these kind of anchor points that we can move away from and come back to.
And you find those sort of intuitively embodied, as you said.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah, and the way that we use other types of modulation, like amplitude modulation and things like that, rather than working as much in the pitch.
Yeah. Neat. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a final comment for me here about kind of relating to how you feel the sensations to your physical body.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that your low tones have to be soft or high tones are louder, and then I just thought maybe it was interesting how when she was balancing those off with a high frequency to balance off your low, and then vice versa. Like, are those all parameters that you sort of set up? Because that really creates so much dimension, and then therefore it does sort of affect you differently physically.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually. Yeah, I mean, we've sketched out, I guess, different points
Yeah.
that we meet at, and then
But a lot of it is still intuitive too. Like we have
Yeah.
these kind of very open pitch structures related to time, but I think a lot of it's still within that.
yeah.
We're listening to each other and making decisions.
Yeah, and I think probably also your the way you're experiencing it that far away is so different from up here that probably it's actually very difficult for us to manipulate or plan out. So that's really interesting though, that you, especially with the two kind of high and low flipping like elements that affected your
And at
physical.
some point, like you said, you don't even know who's doing what.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, because the two sounds, at some point, it becomes almost impossible to separate.
like what you're saying, you walk into that sensation.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
Yeah.
space of kind of really enmeshed sound is something we're really interested in.
yeah,
It happens sometimes where I'll be trying to like turn something down or up and being like, why isn't this responding? And realizing that I'm not hearing myself.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is good. I like those points.
Well,
Not that I want to turn Kate off or anything. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah,
for
thank you
being
so
with
much
us
for being here and
Yeah.
listening and.
Thank you
Super
so much.
grateful.
So
You're
much.
very welcome to stay and continue with some refreshments here. Thank you. When is your performance tomorrow? Is it open to the public? Or-
Yeah.
Oh, we're supposed to
yeah, we
plug
should.
Saturday.
Yeah, we should plug so tomorrow we're in Camrose. If you feel like a drive.
I'm actually going to go there.
Oh, amazing. And that's at the Augustana campus of the U of A. Let's see if I can remember the time. That's at
5
six-
o'clock.
It's at
Thank
5
you.
o'clock. And then Saturday, we'll be performing.
At Grant McEwen at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. 2 Emily? At 2 o'clock.
It's free.
Yes, it's free,
Please do come.
so if you want to hear more,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very
let-
grateful
let's-
to Emily who instigated the haranguing of all the people to allow us to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
thank you.